everybody, this is Mike Oppenheim, and you are listening to Coffin Talk, Interviews with the Living, a weekly podcast that explores how our views on death affect the way we live our life. This week our guest is Vicki Goodman. After the death of her husband in 2019, Vicki was unexpectedly flooded with optimism and presented with a host of possibilities for an exciting and meaningful future. So she wrote To Sam with Love, a surviving spouse's story of inspired grief. And as you all know, this podcast is designed for exactly these kind of guests. So I'm very excited to explore Vicki's career as a writer and also how she has survived her spouse's death and the story of her inspired grief. So welcome to the show, Vicki.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Mike.
It's wonderful to connect with you. And I know like we said, the first three questions I always ask our guests, how old are you? Where did you grow up? And what generation, if any, do you consider yourself a member of?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm 69 years old, and I grew up in the Los Angeles area, actually the part of it called the Valley, you know, where the Valley Girls came from, but I think I dated that. Although I kind of like to think maybe my girlfriends and I had something to do with the start of it, but who knows. And I, having been born in 1955, I am distinctly right smack in the middle of the baby boom generation.
Yeah, my father is born in 1946 and my mother in 1947. I do think I'm going to start with what your book is about and obviously like the loss of your husband. So as much as I feel weird 5 minutes into meeting someone officially, asking them about that, I'm sure you're used to this. So why don't you tell the story as succinctly and in whatever order it's most effective for you and your experience to tell it. But yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good way to start. And don't feel bad because actually what happened for me after the passing of my husband has been rather inspired and positive and optimistic. And I'm sure that must sound weird to people. And it was kind of weird when it started. You know, after Sam passed, we had 2 years from the his cancer diagnosis until he passed. So I also had quite a bit of time to get used to the idea that he would not survive his cancer because we were told that there was a 0% chance by more than one doctor. You know, still, you know, he did so well on treatment that we both thought, you know, there would be a miracle, but there wasn't, and he did pass in July of 2019. So it's been just a little over 5 years. You know, on the day Sam passed, I was suddenly flooded with optimism, and it was unseemly. You know, my first instinct was to push it away. I thought, what's going on here? No, too soon, you know. Mm-hmm. But I thought, you know, I was so strong during our two-year ordeal, and I took such good care of him at the end, which is really not my personality to be a caregiver, but I did a good job. And I thought, you know, if good things want to come my way, even on the day he passes, maybe I should let them.
I like that.
Yeah, it was a really good decision. And what happened was, it was almost like a helping hand was coming down from somewhere outside of myself to lead me forward in a particular way. A whole bunch of things happened. They were all good. And what's stunning about this story is that I was raised very secular. My family's Jewish. I think I heard you in one of your podcast episodes say the same thing, that you were Jewish, but you weren't raised with the religion. Yeah. And it was the exact same for me. So I didn't believe in anything. Until a few years before Sam passed, I started to believe in a higher power because it's all that made sense to me. I was, you know, I'd look around and I'd say, this can't just have, you know, spontaneously occurred on its own. You know, there must be a reason. So I started to think that there was very likely a higher power. But it wasn't until after he passed that I suddenly felt a need to have that belief more solidified. And I also needed to believe in an afterlife. So I had this hospice chaplain from the hospice we'd used. She was available to me about once a month for a full year after Sam passed. And almost immediately after he passed, I started, and the reason I don't say died, which I used to say all the time, you know, in regard to people transitioning to the afterlife, is the reason I don't say died or death anymore is because I don't believe people really leave. You know, they're still, their souls, I now believe their souls survive. that only their body and their brain along with it die. So anyway.
I wouldn't say anyway to that. I thought that was very profound. So I just want to let you know that didn't sound weird to me at all, and I would love to explore that later. So please continue.
Yeah, so I'm talking to the hospice chaplain. And the hospice chaplain, I started asking her immediately about the afterlife because I wanted to know if Sam was still around and where he was. And I didn't really expect to get a satisfactory answer. She recommended I read the story of a secular neurosurgeon who had undergone a brain infection that incidentally he had no wounds of the kind you even need to acquire this infection. So that was the first stunning thing that happened to him. And he was in a coma for 7 days with this infection, being taken care of by his colleagues in the hospital, and they couldn't get the infection under control, and he was going to die or pass, and he had told, and they had told his family that they better hope he doesn't survive this because he would be a vegetable for the rest of his life. That this infection was so extreme that it will have destroyed his brain. So obviously he survived to tell the story, to write a book about it, and to resume his career and go on speaking tours and all this stuff. Anyway, what was so interesting about his story were various aspects of it that he didn't even expand upon, but I later drew conclusions from. So I kind of extrapolated certain insights from things he had said, but insights that he didn't himself come up with, or if he did, they weren't in what I read. So, it was just all these aspects of his near-death experience of the afterlife that brought me the rest of the way to believing in an afterlife and to the various insights that I had about death and the afterlife and God's plan and all these things that happened after 2 years of opportunities coming my way that I felt motivated to embrace, serendipitous events happening, and these insights I was mentioning. Mm-hmm. I thought, I really should write the book because I really think this story can help other people. After I published the book, some of the best insights came to me, and those are insights about the real nature of death.
Wow.
And just to give you a hint of what that is, I asked the question, is death really tragic? And if you'd like me to expound on that, because, your podcast is, called Coffin Talk, I can certainly expand on this here. But what I did was I put those insights that came to me after the publication of the book, I put those in a 3-episode kind of private podcast audio series that I will offer for free to everyone.
I would love for you to answer the standard question, what do you think happens when you die? And then we can go into exactly what you're talking about, which is your insights and all that, because I think that would be the perfect order. What is your take on what's going to happen to you, Vicki, when you pass?
Okay, so from the neurosurgeon's near-death experience that I read about, and from a few others that I've read. I haven't read hundreds of these things like some people have, or looked at videos galore, but I have read a few, and these near-death experiences do have some stunning things in common, and they have some ways in which they differ, and I have some hypotheses about why they differ. So the body and the brain along with it dies, and what the neurosurgeon actually says about the brain is that it kind of acts as sort of a filter or reducing valve, if you will, while we're here on Earth. Now, one of the things he says about his near-death experience is that he knew everything there is to know about, math, physics, history, just everything. And I guess that's because you're at one with God when you're in the afterlife, and God knows everything, of course. So he knew everything. Now, he didn't know everything when he got back because his brain, once again, was acting as its filter and, the reducing valve he talks about.
Okay.
So it reduces way down the knowledge available in the universe, way down to a, reasonable amount of information that most human beings can, retain or conceive while they're here on Earth. So that made sense to me. And that's why when the body dies and the brain along with it, and you go to the afterlife, and you become one with the higher power, God, that you suddenly do understand everything there is to know. And so that actually makes sense to me. It might sound a little highfalutin to others, but it actually makes perfect sense to me. I think very logically. I was a mechanical engineer, so, everything has to kind of make sense to me. And so, okay, so we've gone that far. So, but what I think happens based on his story and some others I've read, I think you go to a different a level based on perhaps your belief system at the point at which your body dies. So he was a secular neurosurgeon that had always poo-pooed the near-death experiences of his patients. He didn't believe any of it until he had his own. And he got to a place that it was like a very unpleasant mud and this loud banging noise he describes. And he calls it the earthworm's eye view. And it was it was rather unpleasant. And he emerges out of there at some point and sees a tunnel with a light. And I don't remember all the details, but, he decides at some point to go through the tunnel to the light. And he does, have a beautiful experience of an all-encompassing, extremely powerful love that we can't possibly even conceive here on Earth. And so it seems to me he rose up out of this mud now that he had begun believing in something. And he now was ready to go to the light and where the good stuff is in the afterlife. And so he joins God, and then he has the experience of knowing everything there is to know. Mm-hmm. And he sees, children playing and dogs, running around. And, so from that we might conclude that we retain our bodies in some fashion. Even though the body died, we take on another form of that body in the afterlife. So this is all very interesting to me. I didn't quite know what to make of it all. But I was drawing some conclusions from all these things I was reading about, and one of them was, well, if God has a plan for us, then it makes perfect sense that in almost all cases, say a married couple, they're not going to pass into the afterlife at the exact same moment. Unless they're in a plane crash or a terrible car accident together, one is going to predecease the other.
Yeah.
And so what is so terrible about that? All it means is that it was part of God's plan. As the survivor, you are the one who is meant to stay here longer. God has a plan for you to learn more, experience more, and maybe even to teach others. And I'm thinking, when you look at it this way, this doesn't have to be awful or tragic. Yes, I will acknowledge that it is very difficult to share your home with someone, the love of your life, and then not have them sharing that home with you in the same way anymore. Mm-hmm. That's where we should experience our grief, meaning we should grieve over the change from the life we knew to a life that may be uncertain at first. You have to find your way. And that, people will grieve over that. But over the loss of the actual person, they're really not gone. So, their soul survives. You'll join them someday. Mm-hmm. This is the way I am now looking at these things, having never believed in anything of the kind, until, it's been 5 years since Sam passed. So shortly after he passed, and that's when this whole thing started. And again, I'm a very logical, analytical person, having been an engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So if the story sounds kind of highfalutin, I get it. I would have been rolling my eyes through the whole thing prior to my experience. But now I've completely changed from what I've learned, from what I've experienced, what I've seen, what I've felt.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really think, just to kind of sum all this up, is that perhaps God has chosen me to be the messenger.
Mm-hmm.
In order to get people not to grieve so hard and so long,
Mm-hmm.
in order to get them to see that this is all part of a plan and that it doesn't have to be awful, that the awfulization is due to cultural conditioning that tells us that these events are tragic, but are they really? And I really think all this applies to any adversity. It doesn't have to be loss of a spouse or loss of any loved one. It can just be any adversity that really throws you into a downward spiral. It's all part of a plan to teach you things. So now, I used to be so impatient, and I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress. But now I see any adverse event, anything from, as little as a bad hair day to something really, really awful, like, maybe what if my house were to burn down now, and anything in between. So now when something bad happens, the first thing I do is I say, okay, what's the lesson I'm supposed to learn from this?
I mean, I love that, and I completely agree. And I think the first time I had something happen to me and I didn't have this agreement was when I was 18 and I was diagnosed with cancer. And then when I was 27, I was hit by a car and I was in a wheelchair, and I sort of got the message. And then when I was in my 30s, I went through a bad divorce, and my ex-wife left the country with my son, and that was when it happened for me. So I felt the grace of God, as you're referring to it, after that third time. And I do feel the same way, and now I am coping the same way. When something from my perspective seems bad, I remember that it's my perspective, and it's not even my soul's perspective necessarily. It's just my limited ego brain, which is referring back to like that doctor who came back and then his brain gets limited again. And I think what connected me before these experiences, though, to what you're saying was, speaking of what we talked about with like the baby boomer generation, when the first time I tried LSD, I felt a knowledge, understanding, conceptual like ease with the universe that felt real. And the other way I feel when I'm not on LSD, which is the majority of my life, obviously, is actually the false one. So I feel a lot of connectivity to what you said. And then I think on the near-death experience stuff, that's like my wheelhouse. I've been reading books and books and books on that, and I've interviewed people. And what I find most profound about it is that people see what they expected to see. So like people from cultures that believe in like nothingness go to like a nothingness place that feels right. And then people who believe in like a really, really, really like Christian heaven with like pearly gates literally see pearly gates, So it's like, to me, fascinating that I think, cause you talked about you'll still have a body or something, and I totally buy that. But I think like you're going to go where Vicki wants to go, and I'm going to go where Mike wants to go. And what blows my mind, what I can't figure out is like, are you seeing the real people there, or are you seeing things that you can create with the same like huge brain? And then even further, one step further, what if we're all connected into this super brain, and then we're all just figments of that brain's brain? So I don't know how much of that stuck with you and didn't, but have you had any of those thoughts?
Hey everyone, if you're a fan of the show, please head over to MikeyOp.com and click the subscribe button. It's the best way to support us, and it's free. That's MikeyOpp.com. Thanks.
I like what you just said about going where, Vicki wants to go, or going where Mike wants to go, and it'll be different depending. I had a different hypothesis, but boy, that sounds reasonable too. What I was thinking was that because this was a secular neurosurgeon who had this experience, that's the reason when he arrived there, he was in this mud, rather than how some people describe who are, the faithful, who at the point at which they cross over, they already believe in God, and maybe maybe have been believing for their entire lives. Maybe they arrive at a higher place. Who knows?
Yeah.
But I'm willing to entertain all of it. And it sounds like you've read a lot more near-death experiences than I have, so you may know better. But one thing was that the neurosurgeons said was that, and one thing I've noticed that are common to a lot of these near-death experiences are that when you arrive there or soon after, you are greeted by someone who predeceased you but was a loved one.
Yes, definitely.
Well,
yeah.
Now this kind of defies one thing you said. So he one thing that bothered him about his experience after he came back was that the angelic young girl who greeted him wasn't anyone who he knew. And he said all of the near-death experiences he was reading about all describe being greeted by someone who the person knew. A loved one, a family member, or a best friend or something. And he couldn't make sense of this until... I don't remember exactly how the story goes, but he had been raised in an adoptive family.
Okay.
And there had been a sister who had died. He had never met her because when he went to live with the family, she was already deceased. And he had never even seen a picture of her. And then after he came back, one of the sisters from his adoptive family said, you've never seen a picture of Betsy, and I found one. And they showed it to him, and he thought, God, she looks so familiar. And it took him a while, probably. I think he said it took him a couple of weeks or something, and then it dawned on him. Betsy was the girl who greeted him in the afterlife. So he never knew her. He didn't know what she looked like.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so it kind of defies a little of what you had said,
Yeah. I say this playfully because I have no confidence in anything I say on this subject, nor should I. It is a fact that your actual brain is processing everything through your entire life, including when you're like 1 day old in the hospital. But your ability to connect to that, retrieve those memories, and then also use concept and language to describe them back to yourself is utterly absurd and almost impossible. There are rare cases where people have memories of like being 4 months old and they can like verify it because they'll say like sentences that match something like the adult in the room said. You know what I mean? So there are like absolutely rare circumstances, but my overall point is more about like the Carl Jung superconsciousness and the idea that like if we really are all connected, then in an alternate state with your brain connected to that, like I'm calling it bigger brain, which is totally stupid if you read quantum physics. Like I shouldn't be using these terms, but for me it's easier to picture it that way. Then he would be able to. So both of those could explain that. And I'm not saying it I'm saying it more to support that, like, I think it's all possible, if that makes any sense.
That's what I was saying, too, that, I hadn't thought of it your way, but boy, it's as good as anything I've come up with.
Yeah. You said I had this, like, ground-shaking new philosophy about life and death, and now I am, like,
right.
Yeah. But before that, you didn't have that. So I'm curious, now that you've had, like, an esoteric event, something happened that was, like, beyond things that you're going to find in a textbook in any country here on Earth, would it be less likely or more likely for you to have yet another sea change? Like, did that make you more compelled to believe in, like, your own sense of intuition and direct downloads of the truth? Or would it make you, like, no, this is really the one? So what I'm trying to ask is, like, what if you had, like, an angel appear to you tonight and they said, you got it all wrong, Vicki, you talked about, and again, I'm saying this playfully, the actual truth is that you're supposed to murder babies, and like what level of trust would you have now in, like, esoteric data, information, and science from the universe? And I'm just curious, because I think about this myself a lot.
Well, I think that the experience I've had thus far has been so positive, and it's changed me. It's changed my willingness and my desire to help others, which was not a big thing on my radar. In fact, I've experienced quite a bit of guilt over the years on being a little bit on the self-involved side, and not one to volunteer to help others, that kind of thing. And now suddenly I'm spending all my time trying to get this message out, and I wrote the book. But the point is, now I have found a way to help other people that feels right. And so I'm saying maybe the guilt was misplaced. Maybe I just needed to wait until there was a time when a way to help others would appear that would feel right to me. Mm-hmm. And so that did. And now if I were to get, a message that told me that I'm on the wrong track.
Okay.
I'd listen to it and I'd say, well, what has all this been about? And I'd start, what I would do is I'd say, okay, there had to have been a lesson in this somewhere, because I've been going to a lot of effort, spending a lot of my time, making quite a few sacrifices, in not seeing people as much that I would really like to spend time with, that kind of thing, because I'm doing this. And so I'm saying, okay, I'm not going to get all angry at God for steering me in this direction, because now it appears I've been, doing it all for naught. No, if I were to get a message like that, I would change direction toward figuring out what the lesson is from my having gone through all this, but it not being the right path after all.
That's a great answer. That's really cool. And that's it's not creative like in a corny way, but there's a creativity to it that I admire, because I think to me that just gels. That just sounds like exactly appropriate. So, and again, the reason I asked it is as I became more spiritually aware, I also became aware of people who take advantage of people who are spiritual, because I wrote a book on psychics, so I did research on it, and I do believe there are psychics who can tap into what Einstein and other people have talked about, how time and space aren't actually connected. But what I don't believe in is almost all of them. So I'll just say it that way. More often than not, they're doing cold reading, they're doing tips, they're trying to, and the reason I bring this up is that I'm self-preservationally skeptical sometimes. If I'm too avidly engrossed or quick to believe someone, I want to slow down, because there are too many people ready for people like you and me who just had a tragedy but haven't had the grace and realization yet. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and a lot of them never do. That's why I think God has chosen me for this mission. Maybe because I started out so secular, and so it makes it more convincing for those receiving the message, because this is not. And to what you said about, and I know you were just joking, about what if the message was for you to go out and kill babies or something. But the point is, this is not like a cult experience where I've been brainwashed somehow. Yeah. I mean, I've got my wits about me, and I've got my moral clarity about me, and there's no way I'm going to latch onto a message that sounds way off base. The whole thing about what's happened to me is how overwhelmingly positive it was. Now, I still grieve, so it's not like I didn't grieve, but I didn't solely grieve. In fact, one of my recommendations to people who do suffer such a loss is to create a balance. This was just obvious to me. I created a balance between activity and alone time. I completely ignored the advice of those who told me, Vicki, just keep yourself as busy as possible so you don't have time to think or feel. And I knew instinctively right away that was advice I knew it was well-intended, but I knew it was advice to ignore. And so I created this balance of activity and alone time, activity being, I decided to audition for a staged reading at the Playhouse. And I rejoined the orchestra I had been playing in when we got Sam's diagnosis. Having lunch with a friend, I discovered karaoke due to a recommendation of some friends right after Sam passed. I mean, all these wonderful things started happening. But I made sure that I had some quiet time too, because I knew I needed to process what had happened to my life.
I mean, that's incredible. And I really appreciate everything you said in this interview. And I really appreciate your openness to exploring and being okay with it. Very early on when you said, maybe I should just let this happen. I love that, your first reaction was to resist it, because I think like I was alluding to earlier, I think a lot of people in society would say it's crazy to feel the love of God the way you do, and then to like stop being so like when someone says you're selfish, that's their take, right? But like it is true that like if I was told that Elon Musk lost his wife tomorrow and then decided he's giving away every single penny he has and he's going to move to Central Africa and go in deep into the Congo and start doing like third world work with like digging latrines anonymously, you know, like a lot of people would say that's insane, that's wrong, that's inappropriate. And what you're saying is no, that would actually be like the totally right call. So I really appreciate you, Vicki, and I appreciate everything you've said.
Yeah, so glad you had me on. You know, people don't like to talk about death, Mike, and they should. I really think it's important, and it doesn't have to be a terrible subject.
Oh, that's so cool, and I appreciate you saying that. And yeah, it's not always fun, and it's not always easy, but it is always worth it. So thank you, Vicki. Thank you to our audience for listening. As always, if you want to support the show, please head over to MikeyUp.com and hit the big old subscribe button for the free weekly essay. And if you want to go the extra mile, offer us a premium subscription, and you're helping other people receive the same benefits as you. All right, thank you again, Vicki. Thank you again to our audience. My name is Mike Oppenheim. You have been listening to Coffin Talk, and we will see you soon.